kind, resty, merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day, to save us all from Satan's power when we were gone astray. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy.
Hi there, and welcome to day 1 of the 12 days of CraftLit. You might be able to tell from my voice that I am a little sick right now, but that is not going to hinder us from listening to some awesome Christmassy texts. This is it's not even semi-annual, it's occasional whenever it works out, Christmas audio. And this year, due to long COVID, working on Vindication of the Rights of Women, doing prep work on Pride and Prejudice Redux, because it's about time, it's only been almost 20 years, and our new series, Moby Dick, prep work on all of that is kind of taken up all the time. So instead of trying to wrestle out new Christmas audio, what we're going to do is give you a compilation from 2016, 2017, and 2023. We're just going to pack these things together and give you lots of things to listen to. These compilations will go up on YouTube, where you'll be able to see my intro and you'll be able to see images from the original texts of the stories that you're listening to. It's either cover art or drawings that were on the inside of the books. And then there'll be time codes in the description for when the stories change to the next story. Or if you're listening on our podcast app or Patreon or your own podcatcher or craftlit.com, you will hear all the audio and you'll be able to see those same time codes in the show notes on those locations. That way, if you wanted to skip a story or move ahead to something or go back and listen to something again, we've made it easier for you. All right, ready? All right. Let's get into the spirit of the season and travel back to 2016 with me.
The Mouse and the Christmas Cake by Anonymous. Read by Rhonda Fetterman. A little mouse that built itself a house in a Christmas cake. A pretty story I will tell of Nib, a little mouse who took delight, when none were near, to skip about the house. Her little nose could sniff and smell where all good things were kept, and in the pantry well she knew that Mistress Pussy slept. But notwithstanding in she crept, and on the shelf she found a Christmas cake, the top of which was by a castle crowned. The subject of the present cake was Windsor's mighty walls, with turrets, windows, standard too, and entrance to the halls. Why, here within such walls as these, thought Mousie, I could dwell, and should the cat lay siege to them, defend myself right well. So with her little teeth, which served for pickaxe and for spade, she gnawed right through the Gothic door, and thus an entrance made. Then climbed the turret, which she chose her residence to make, and thought to leave it now and then, and feast upon the cake. All this occurred on Christmas Eve, and next came Christmas Day, and then some little folks arrived to eat and drink and play. Right merry are the little folks, and what a noise they make when Windsor Castle they behold displayed upon the cake. The turrets and the walls they view, the cannon too admire, the soldiers ready to present, and then pop, pop, to fire. On this, when they had long enough all exercised their wit, they scrutinized the cake and wished to taste a bit of it. Each guest prepared, the knife was raised, some slices to begin, when lo, with wonder, all exclaimed, I hear a noise within. Poor Mousie, when she saw the knife, at once expressed her fear, by squeaking out with all her might, which every one could hear. Then John, as he the turret viewed, with consternation cried, There's something, I am sure, alive, and moving too inside. All now were hushed, and knew not what all this could be about, while Mouse in fright forgot her tail, which at the top popped out. "Why, here's some trick," the lady cried. "I'll knock the turret down." Mousie in terror gave a leap and ran along her gown. "Oh!" screamed the lady, "what is this?" On each side was dismay, which Mousie took advantage of by scampering away. Their fright all o'er, loud laughs ensued from all within the house, to think that so much fear should be caused by a little mouse. The children hunted for this mouse, but she was not a dolt to wait till she was caught, but made right through a hole a bolt. The party then began their dance, and singing next ensued, and then came supper with its cakes, and very best home brewed.
The Fir Tree by Hans Christian Andersen. Recording by Elisa McCaslin. Out in the woods stood a nice little fir tree. The place he had was a very good one. The sun shone on him. As to fresh air, there was enough of that, and round him grew many large-sized comrades, pines as well as firs. But the little fir wanted so very much to be a grown-up tree. He did not think of the warm sun and of the fresh air. He did not care for the little cottage children that ran about and prattled when they were in the woods looking for wild strawberries. The children often came with a whole pitcher full of berries, or a long row of them threaded on a straw, and sat down near the young tree and said, "Oh, how pretty he is! What a nice little fir!" But this was what the tree could not bear to hear. At the end of a year, he had shot up a good deal, and after another year, he was another long bit taller. For with fir trees, one can always tell by the shoots how many years old they are. "Oh, were but I such a high tree as the others are," sighed he, "then I should be able to spread out my branches, and with the tops to look into the wide world. Then would the birds build nests among my branches, and when there was a breeze, I could bend with as much stateliness as the others." Neither the sunbeams, nor the birds, nor the red clouds which morning and evening sailed above them, gave the little tree any pleasure. In winter, when the snow lay glittering on the ground, a hare would often come leaping along and jump right over the little tree. Oh, that made him so angry. But 2 winters were past, and in the third, the tree was so large that the hare was obliged to go round it. To grow and grow, to get older and be tall, thought the tree. That, after all, is the most delightful thing in the world. In autumn, the woodcutters always came and felled some of the largest trees. This happened every year, and the young fir tree, that had now grown to a very comely size, trembled at the sight, for the magnificent great trees fell to the earth with noise and cracking. The branches were lopped off, and the tree looked long and bare. They were hardly to be recognized, and then they were laid in carts, and the horses dragged them out of the woods. Where did they go to? What became of them? In spring, when the swallows and the storks came, the tree asked them, "Don't you know where they have been taken? Have you not met them anywhere?" The swallows did not know anything about it, but the stork looked musing, nodded his head, and said, "Yes, I think I know. I met many ships as I was flying hither from Egypt. On the ships were magnificent masts, and I venture to assert that it was they that smelt so of fir. I may congratulate you, for they lifted themselves on high most majestically. Oh, were I but old enough to fly across the sea! But how does the sea look in reality? What is it like?" "That would take a long time to explain," said the stork, and with these words off he went. "Rejoice in thy growth," said the sunbeams. "Rejoice in thy vigorous growth, and in the fresh life that moveth within thee." And the wind kissed the tree, and the dew wept tears over him. But the fir understood it not. When Christmas came, quite young trees were cut down, trees which often were not even as large or of the same age as the fir tree, who could never rest, but always wanted to be off. These young trees, and they were always the finest looking, retained their branches. They were laid on carts, and the horses drew them out of the woods. Where are they going to? Asked the fir. They are not taller than I. There was one indeed that was considerably shorter. And why do they retain all their branches? Whither are they taken? We know, chirped the sparrows. We have peeped in at the windows in the town below. We know whither they are taken. The greatest splendor and the greatest magnificence one can imagine await them. We peeped through the windows and saw them planted in the middle of the warm room and ornamented with the most splendid things, with gilded apples, with gingerbread, with toys, and many hundred lights. And then, asked the fir tree, trembling in every bough, and then, what happens then? We did not see anything more. It was incomparably beautiful. I would fain know if I am destined for so glorious a career, cried the tree, rejoicing. That is still better than to cross the sea. What a longing do I suffer! Were Christmas but come! I am now tall, and my branches spread like the others that were carried off last year. Oh, were I but already on the cart! Were I in the warm room with all the splendor and magnificence! Yes, then something better, something still grander, will surely follow, or wherefore should they thus ornament me? Something better, something still grander, must follow. But what? Oh, how I long, how I suffer! I do not know myself what is the matter with me. Rejoice in our presence, said the air and the sunlight. Rejoice in thy own fresh youth. But the tree did not rejoice at all. He grew, and was green both winter and summer. People, they saw him, said, "What a fine tree!" And toward Christmas he was one of the first that was cut down. The axe struck deep into the very pith. The tree fell to the earth with a sigh. He felt a pang. It was like a swoon. He could not think of happiness, for he was sorrowful at being separated from his home, from the place where he had sprung up. He knew well that he should never see his dear old comrades, the little bushes and flowers around him any more, perhaps not even the birds. The departure was not at all agreeable. The tree only came to himself when he was unloaded in a courtyard with the other trees, and heard a man say, "That one is splendid. We don't want the others." Then 2 servants came in rich livery and carried the fir tree into a large and splendid drawing room. Portraits were hanging on the walls, and near the white porcelain stove stood 2 large Chinese vases with lions on the covers. There, too, were large easy chairs, silken sofas, large tables full of picture books and full of toys worth hundreds and hundreds of crowns. At least the children said so. And the fir tree was stuck upright in a cask that was filled with sand. But no one could see that it was a cask, for green cloth was hung all around it, and it stood on a large gaily colored carpet. Oh, how the tree quivered! What was to happen? The servants as well as the young ladies decorated it. On one branch there hung little nets cut out of colored paper, and each net was filled with sugar plums. And among the other boughs gilded apples and walnuts were suspended, looking as though they had grown there. And little blue and white tapers were placed among the leaves. Dolls that looked for all the world like men, the tree had never beheld such before, were seen among the foliage, and at the very top a large star of gold tinsel was fixed. It was really splendid, beyond description splendid. "This evening," said they all, "how it will shine this evening." Oh, thought the tree, if the evening were but come, if the tapers were but lighted, and then I wonder what will happen. Perhaps the other trees from the forest will come to look at me. Perhaps the sparrows will beat against the window panes. I wonder if I shall take root here, and winter and summer stand covered with ornaments. He knew very much about the matter, but he was so impatient for sheer longing he got a pain in his back. And this with trees is the same thing as a headache with us. The candles were now lighted. What brightness, what splendor! The tree trembled so in every bough that one of the tapers set fire to the foliage. It blazed up splendidly. "Help, help!" cried the young ladies, and they quickly put out the fire. Now the tree did not even dare tremble. What a state he was in! He was so uneasy lest he should lose something of his splendor that he was quite bewildered amidst the glare and brightness, when suddenly both folding doors opened, and a troop of children rushed in as if they would upset the tree. The older persons followed quietly. The little ones stood quite still, but it was only for a moment. Then they shouted so that the whole place re-echoed with their rejoicing. They danced round the tree, and one present after the other was pulled off. "What are they about?" thought the tree. "What is to happen now?" And the lights burned down to the very branches, and as they burned down they were put out, one after the other. And then the children had permission to plunder the tree, so they fell upon it with such violence that all its branches cracked. If it had not been fixed firmly in the cast, it would certainly have tumbled down. The children danced about with their beautiful playthings. No one looked at the tree except the old nurse, who peeped between the branches, but it was only to see if there was a fig or an apple left that had been forgotten. A story, cried the children, drawing a little fat man toward the tree. He seated himself under it and said, "Now we are in the shade, and the tree can listen too, but I shall tell only one story. Now which will you have? That about Ivedy Avedy, or about Klumpy Dumpy, who tumbled downstairs and yet after all came to the throne and married the princess?" "Ivedy Avedy," cried some. "Klumpy Dumpy," cried the others. There was such a bawling and screaming, the fir tree alone was silent, and he thought to himself, "Am I not to bawl with the rest? Am I to do nothing whatever?" For he was one of the company, and had done what he had to do. And the man told about Klumpy Dumpy, that tumbled down, who notwithstanding came to the throne, and at last married the princess. And the children clapped their hands and cried out, "Oh, go on! Do go on!" They wanted to hear about Ivedy Avedy too, but the little man only told them about Klumpy Dumpy. The fir tree stood quite still and absorbed in thought. The birds in the woods had never related the like of this. Klumpy Dumpy fell downstairs, and yet he married the princess. Yes, that's the way of the world, thought the fir tree, and believed it all, because the man who told the story was so good-looking. Well, who knows? Perhaps I may fall downstairs too and get a princess as wife. And he looked forward with joy to the morrow, when he hoped to be decked out again with lights, playthings, fruits, and tinsel. "I won't tremble tomorrow," thought the fir tree. "I will enjoy to the full all my splendor. Tomorrow I shall hear again the story of Klumpy Dumpy, and perhaps that of Ivedy Avedy too." And the whole night the tree stood still and in deep thought. In the morning the servant and the housemaid came in. "Now, then, the splendor will begin again," thought the fir. But they dragged him out of the room and up the stairs into the loft. And here, in a dark corner where no daylight could enter, they left him. "What's the meaning of this?" thought the tree. "What am I to do here? What shall I hear now, I wonder?" And he leaned against the wall, lost in reverie. Time enough had he, too, for his reflections, for day and nights passed on, and nobody came up. And when at last somebody did come, it was only to put some great trunks in a corner out of the way. There stood the tree quite hidden. It seemed as if he had been entirely forgotten. "'Tis now winter out of doors," thought the tree. "The earth is hard and covered with snow. Men cannot plant me now, and therefore I have been put up here under shelter till the springtime comes. How thoughtful that is! How kind man is, after all! If it only were not so dark here and so terribly lonely, not even a hare. And out in the woods it was so pleasant when the snow was on the ground and the hare leaped by, yes, even when he jumped over me. But I did not like it then. It is really terribly lonely here." "Squeak, squeak," said a little mouse at the same moment, peeping out of his hole, and then another little one came. They sniffed about the fir tree, rustled among the branches. "It is dreadfully cold," said the mouse, "but for that it would be delightful here, old fir, wouldn't it?" "I am by no means old," said the fir tree. "There's many a one considerably older than I am." "Where do you come from?" asked the mice, "and what can you do?" They were so extremely curious. "Tell us about the most beautiful spot on the earth. Have you never been there? Were you never in the larder where cheeses lie on the shelves and hams hang from above, where one dances about on tallow candles, That place where one enters lean and comes out again fat and portly. I know no such place, said the tree, but I know the woods where the sun shines, where the little birds sing. And then he told all about his youth, and the little mice had never heard the like before, and they listened and said, "Well, to be sure, how much you have seen, how happy you must have been." "I," said the fir tree, thinking over what he had himself related. "Yes, in reality those were happy times." And then he told about Christmas Eve when he was decked out with cakes and candles. "Oh," said the little mice, "how fortunate you have been, old fir tree." "I am by no means old," said he. "I came from the woods this winter. I am in my prime, and am only rather short for my age." "What delightful stories you know," said the mice, and the next night they came with 4 other little mice, who were to hear what the tree recounted. And the more he related, the more plainly he remembered all himself, and it appeared as if those times had really been happy times. But they may still come, they may still come. Klumpy Dumpy fell downstairs, and yet he got a princess, and he thought at the moment of a nice little birch tree growing out in the woods. To the fir, that would be a real charming princess. "Who is Klumpy Dumpy?" asked the mice. So then the fir tree told the whole fairy tale, for he could remember every single word of it, and the little mice jumped for joy up to the very top of the tree. Next night 2 more mice came, and on Sunday 2 rats even. But they said the stories were not interesting, which vexed the little mice, and they too now began to think them not so very amusing either. "Do you know only one story?" asked the rats. "Only that one," answered the tree. "I heard it on my happiest evening, but I did not then know how happy I was." "It is a very stupid story. Don't you know one about bacon and tallow candles? Can't you tell any larder stories?" "No," said the tree. "Then goodbye," said the rats, and they went home. At last the little mice stayed away also, and the tree sighed. "After all, it was very pleasant when the sleek little mice sat around me and listened to what I told them. Now that too is over, but I will take good care to enjoy myself when I am brought out again." But when was that to be? Why, one morning there came a quantity of people and set to work in the loft. The trunks were moved. The tree was pulled out and thrown, rather hard it is true, down on the floor. But a man drew him towards the stairs where the daylight shone. Now a merry life will begin again, thought the tree. He felt the fresh air, the first sunbeam, and now he was out in the courtyard. All passed so quickly, there was so much going on around him, that the tree quite forgot to look to himself. The court adjoined a garden, and all was in flower. The roses hung so fresh and odorous over the balustrade. The lindens were in blossom. The swallows flew by and said, "Queer vit, my husband is come." But it was not the fir tree that they meant. "Now then, I shall really enjoy life," said he exultantly, and spread out his branches. But alas, they were all withered and yellow. It was in a corner that he lay, among weeds and nettles. The golden star of tinsel was still on the top of the tree and glittered in the sunshine. In the courtyard some of the merry children were playing, who had danced at Christmas round the fir tree, and were so glad at the sight of him. One of the youngest ran and tore off the golden star. "Only look what is still on the ugly old Christmas tree," said he, trampling on the branches so that they all cracked beneath his feet. And the tree beheld all the beauty of the flowers and the freshness in the garden. He beheld himself and wished he had remained in his dark corner in the loft. He thought of his first youth in the woods of the merry Christmas Eve, and of the little mice who had listened with so much pleasure to the story of Klumpy Dumpy. "'Tis over, 'tis past," said the poor tree. "Had I but rejoiced when I had reason to do so, but now 'tis past, 'tis past." And the gardener's boy chopped the tree into small pieces. There was a whole heap lying there. The wood flamed up splendidly under the large brewing copper, and it sighed so deeply. Each sigh was like a shot. The boys played about in the court, and the youngest wore the gold star on his breast, which the tree had had on the happiest evening of his life. However, that was over now. The tree was gone, the story at an end. All was over. Every tale must end at last.
Hoodoo McFiggins Christmas by Stephen Leacock. This reading is by Dave Ranson. This Santa Claus business is played out. It's a sneaking underhand method, and the sooner it's exposed, the better. For a parent to get up under cover of the darkness of night and palm off a 10-cent necktie on a boy who had been expecting a $10 watch and then say that an angel sent it to him is low. Undeniably low. I had a good opportunity of observing how the thing worked this Christmas, in the case of young Hoodoo McFiggin, the son and heir of the McFiggins, at whose house I board. Hoodoo McFiggin is a good boy, a religious boy. He had been given to understand that Santa Claus would bring nothing to his father and mother because grown-up people don't get presents from the angels. So he saved up all his pocket money and bought a box of cigars for his father and a 75-cent diamond brooch for his mother. His own fortunes he left in the hands of the angels. But he prayed. He prayed every night for weeks that Santa Claus would bring him a pair of skates and a puppy dog and an air gun and a bicycle and a Noah's Ark and a sleigh and a drum. Altogether about $150 worth of stuff. I went into Hoodoo's room quite early Christmas morning. I had an idea that the scene would be interesting. I woke him up and he sat up in bed, his eyes glistening with radiant expectation, and began hauling things out of his stocking. The first parcel was bulky. It was done up quite loosely and had an odd look generally. "Ha-ha!" Hoodoo cried gleefully as he began undoing it. "I'll bet it's the puppy dog, all wrapped up in paper." And was it the puppy dog? No, by no means. It was a pair of nice, strong No. 4 boots, laces and all, labeled Hoodoo, from Santa Claus. And underneath Santa Claus had written, 95 net. The boy's jaw fell with delight. "It's boots," he said, and plunged in his hand again. He began hauling away at another parcel with renewed hope on his face. This time the thing seemed like a little round box. Hoodoo tore the paper off it with a feverish hand. He shook it. Something rattled inside. "It's a watch and chain! It's a watch and chain!" he shouted. Then he pulled the lid off. And was it a watch and chain? No. It was a box of nice brand new celluloid collars, a dozen of them, all alike, and all his own size. The boy was so pleased that you could see his face crack up with pleasure. He waited a few minutes until his intense joy subsided. Then he tried again. This time the packet was long and hard. It resisted the touch and had a sort of funnel shape. "It's a toy pistol," said the boy, trembling with excitement. "Gee, I hope there are lots of caps with it. I'll fire some off now and wake up Father." "No, my poor child, you will not wake your father with that. It is a useful thing, but it needs not caps, and it fires no bullets, and you cannot wake a sleeping man with a toothbrush." Yes, it was a toothbrush. A regular beauty, pure bone all through, and ticketed with a little paper, "Hoodoo, from Santa Claus." Again the expression of intense joy passed over the boy's face, and the tears of gratitude started from his eyes. He wiped them away with his toothbrush and passed on. The next packet was much larger and evidently contained something soft and bulky. It had been too long to go into the stocking and was tied outside. "I wonder what this is," Hoodoo mused, half afraid to open it. Then his heart gave a great leap and he forgot all his other presents in the anticipation of this one. "It's the drum," he gasped. "It's the drum, all wrapped up." Drum nothing. It was pants. A pair of the nicest little short pants. Yellowish-brown short pants. With dear little stripes of color running across both ways, and here again Santa Claus had written, "Hoodoo, from Santa Claus, 1 fort net." But there was something wrapped up in it. Oh yes, there was a pair of braces wrapped up in it. Braces with a little steel sliding thing so that you could slide your pants up to your neck if you wanted to. The boy gave a dry sob of satisfaction. Then he took out his last present. "It's a book," he said as he unwrapped it. "I wonder if it is fairy stories or adventures. Oh, I hope it's adventures. I'll read it all morning." No, Hoodoo, it was not precisely adventures. It was a small family Bible. Hoodoo had now seen all his presents and he arose and dressed, but he still had the fun of playing with his toys. That is always the chief delight of Christmas morning. First he played with his toothbrush. He got a whole lot of water and brushed all his teeth with it. This was huge. Then he played with his collars. He had no end of fun with them, taking them all out one by one and swearing at them, and then putting them back and swearing at the whole lot together. The next toy was his pants. He had immense fun there, putting them on and taking them off again, and then trying to guess which side was which by merely looking at them. After that he took his book and read some adventures called Genesis till breakfast time. Then he went downstairs and kissed his father and mother. His father was smoking a cigar, and his mother had her new brooch on. Hoodoo's face was thoughtful, and a light seemed to have broken in upon his mind. Indeed, I think it altogether likely that next Christmas he will hang on to his own money and take chances on what the angels bring.
If you have a book lover or bibliophile in your life, then consider gifting them a premium membership. Our premium membership gives you access to book parties, watch parties, Discord access, and all our premium books, our premium audio, and occasionally video content, all for an entire year. Go to craftlit.gumroad.com. That's CRAFT as in Tom, LIT .gumroad, GUM as in Mary, ROAD as in dog.com, and give someone a premium membership, or go to craftlit.com/premium to get the membership for yourself.
Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen.
A Little Book of Christmas by John Kendrick Bangs. Section 2, The Child Who Had Everything But. Part 1. I knew it was coming long before it got there. Every symptom was in sight. I had grown fidgety and sat fearful of something overpoweringly impending. Strange noises filled the house. Things generally, according to their nature, severally creaked, soughed, and moaned. There was a ghost on the way. That was perfectly clear to an expert in uncanny visitations of my wide experience, and I heartily wished it were not. There was a time when I welcomed such visitors with open arms, because there was a decided demand for them in the literary market, and I had been able to turn a great variety of spooks into anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 words apiece at 5 cents a word. But now the age had grown too skeptical to swallow ghostly reminiscence with any degree of satisfaction. People had grown tired of hearing about visions and desired that their tales should reek with the scent of gasoline, quiver with the superfervid fever of tangential loves, and crash with moral thunderbolts aimed against malefactors of great achievement and high social and commercial standing. Wherefore it seemed an egregious waste of time for me to dally with a spook, or with anything else for that matter, that had no strictly utilitarian value to one so professionally pressed as I was, and especially at a moment like that. It was Christmas morning, and the hour was 28 minutes after 2, when I was so busy preparing my Ode to June and trying to work out the details of a midsummer romance in time for the market for such productions early in the coming January. And right in the midst of all this pressure there rose up these beastly symptoms of an impending visitation. At first I strove to fight them off, but as the minutes passed they became so obsessively intrusive that I could not concentrate upon the work at hand, and I resolved to have it over with. "Oh, well," said I, striking a few impatient chords upon my typewriting machines, "if you insist upon coming, come, and let's have done with it." I roared this out, addressing the dim depths of the adjoining apartment, whence had risen the first dank apprehension of the uncanny something that had come to pester me. "This is my busy night," I went on, when nothing happened in response to my summons, "and I give you fair warning that, however psychic I may be now, I've got too much to do to stay so much longer. If you're going to haunt, haunt." It was in response to this appeal that the thing first manifested itself to the eye. It took the shape first of a very slight veil of green fog, which shortly began to swirl slowly from the darkness of the other room, through the intervening portieres, into my den. Once within, it increased the vigor of its swirl, until almost before I knew it, there was spinning immediately before my desk something in the nature of a misty maelstrom, buzzing around like a pinwheel in action. Very pretty indeed, said I, a trifle sarcastically, refusing to be impressed. But I don't care for pyrotechnics. I suppose, I added flippantly, that you are what might be called a mince pyrotechnic, eh? Whether it was the quality of my jest, or some other inward pang due to its gyratory behavior that caused it, I know not, but as I spoke, a deep groan issued from the center of the whirling mist, and then out of its indeterminateness there was resolved the hazy figure of an angel. Only she was an intensely modern angel. She wore a hobble skirt instead of the usual flowing robes of ladies of the supernal order, and her halo, instead of hovering over her head as used to be the correct manner of wearing these hard-won adornments, had perforce become a mere golden fillet, binding together the great mass of finger curls and other distinctly yellow capillary attractions that stretched out from the back of her cerebellum for 2 or 3 feet, like a monumental Psyche knot. I could hardly restrain a shudder as I realized the theatric quality of the lady's appearance, and I honestly dreaded the possible consequences of her visit. We live in a tolerably censorious age, and I did not care to be seen in the company of such a peroxidized vision as she appeared to be. "I am afraid, madam," said I, shrinking back against the wall as she approached, "I am very much afraid that you have got into the wrong house. Mr. Slatherberry, the theatrical manager, lives next door." She paid no attention to this observation, but, holding out a compelling hand, bade me come along with her, her voice having about it all the musical charm of an oboe suffering from bronchitis. "Not in a year of Sundays I won't," I retorted. "I am a respectable man, a steady churchgoer, a trustee for several philanthropic institutions, and a Sunday school teacher. I don't wish to be impolite, but really, madam, rich as I am in reputation, I am too poor to be seen in public with you." "I am a spirit," she began. "I'll take your word for it," I interjected, and I could see that she told the truth, for she was entirely diaphanous, so much so, indeed, that one could perceive the piano in the other room with perfect clarity through her intervening shadiness. It is, however, the unfortunate fact that I have sworn off spirits. "None the less," she returned, her eyes flashing and her hand held forth peremptorily, "you must come. It is your predestined doom." My next remark I am not wholly clear about, but as I remember it, it sounded something like, "I'll be doomed if I do." Whereupon she threatened me. "It is useless to resist," she said. "If you decline to come voluntarily, I shall hypnotize you and force you to follow me. We have need of you." "But, my dear lady," I pleaded, "please have some regard for my position. I never did any of you spirits any harm. I've treated every visitor from the spirit land with the most distinguished consideration, and I feel that you owe it to me to be regardful of my good name. Suppose you take a look at yourself in yonder looking-glass, and then say if you think it fair to compel a decent, law-abiding man of domestic inclinations like myself to be seen in public with, well, with such a looking head of hair as that of yours." My visitor laughed heartily. "Oh, if that's all," she said amiably, "we can arrange matters in a jiffy. Your wife possesses a hooded mackintosh, does she not? I think I saw something of the kind hanging on the hat rack as I floated in. I will wear that if it will make you feel any easier." "It certainly would," said I. "But see here. Can't you scare up some other cavalier to escort you to the haven of your desires?" She fixed a sternly steady eye upon me for a moment. "Aren't you the man who wrote the lines, 'The world's a green and gladsome ball, and love's the ruler of it all, and life's the chance vouchsafed to me for deeds and gifts of sympathy'?" "Didn't you write that?" she demanded. "I did, madam," said I, "and I meant every word of it, but what of it? Is that any reason why I should be seen on a public highway with a lady ghost of your especial kind?" "Enough of your objections," she retorted firmly. "You are the person for whom I have been sent. We have a case needing your immediate attention. The only question is, will you come pleasantly and of your own free will, or must I resort to extreme measures?" These words were spoken with such determination that I realized that further resistance was useless, and I yielded. "All right," said I. "On your way. I'll follow." "Good!" she cried, her face wreathing with a pleasant little Nile green smile. "Get the mackintosh, and we'll be off. There's no time to lose," she added, as the clock in the tower on the square boomed out the hour of 3. "What is this, anyhow?" I demanded, as I helped her on with the mackintosh, and saw that the hood covered every vestige of that awful coiffure. "Another case of Scrooge?" "Sort of," she replied, as, hooking her arm in mine, she led me forth into the night. Part 2. We passed over to Fifth Avenue and proceeded uptown at a pace which reminded me of the active gait of my youth. My footsteps had grown unwontedly light, and we covered the first 10 blocks in about 3 minutes. "We don't seem to be headed for the slums," I panted. "Indeed we are not," she retorted. "There is no need of carrying coals to Newcastle on this occasion. This isn't a slum case. It's far more acute than that." A tear came forth from her eye and trickled down over the mackintosh. "It is a peculiarity of modern effort on behalf of suffering humanity," she went on, "that it is concentrated upon the relief of the misery of the so-called submerged to the utter neglect of the often more poignant needs of the emerged. We have workers by the thousand in the slums, doing all that can be done, and successfully too, to relieve the unhappy condition of the poor. But nobody ever seems to think of the sorrows of the starving hundreds on Upper Fifth Avenue." "See here, madam," said I, stopping suddenly short under a lamp post in front of the public library, "I want to tell you right now that if you think you are going to take me into any of the homes of the hopelessly rich at this hour of the morning, you are the most mightily mistaken creature that ever wore a Psyche knot. Why, great heavens, my dear lady, suppose the owner of the house were to wake up and demand to know what I was doing there at this time of night. What could I say?" "You have gone on slumming parties, haven't you?" she demanded coldly. "Often," said I, "but that's different." "Why?" she asked with a simplicity that baffled me. "Is it any worse for you to intrude upon the home of a Fifth Avenue millionaire than it is to go unasked into the small, squalid tenement of some poor sweatshop worker on the East Side?" "Oh, but it's different," I protested. "I go there to see if there is anything I can do to relieve the unhappy condition of the persons who live in the slums." "No doubt," said she. "I'll take your word for it. But is that any reason why you should neglect the sufferers who live in these marbled palaces?" As she spoke, she hooked hold of my arm once more, and in a moment we were climbing the front door steps of a palatial residence. The house showed a dark and forbidding front at that hour in the morning, despite its marble splendors, and I was glad to note that the massive grill doors of wrought iron were heavily barred. "It's useless, you see. We're locked out," I ventured. "Indeed?" she retorted, with a sarcastic smile, as she seized my hand in her icy grip and literally pulled me after her through the marble front of the dwelling. "What have we to do with bolts and bars?" "I don't know," said I ruefully, "but I have a notion that if I don't bolt, I'll get the bars all right." I could see them coming, and they were headed straight for me. "All you have to do is to follow me," she went on, as we floated upward for 2 flights, paying but little attention to the treasures of art that lined the walls, and finally passing into a superbly lighted salon, more daintily beautiful than anything of the kind I had ever seen before. "Jove!" I ejaculated, standing amazed in the presence of such luxury and beauty. I did not realize that with all her treasures New York held anything quite so fine as this. What is it? A music room? "It is the nursery," said my companion. "Look about you and see for yourself." I did as I was bidden, and such an array of toys as that inspection revealed! Truly, it looked as if the toy market in all sections of the world had been levied upon for tribute. Had all the famous toy emporiums of Nuremberg itself been transported thither bodily, there could not have been playthings in greater variety than there greeted my eye. From the most insignificant of tin soldiers to the most intricate of mechanical toys for the delectation of the youthful mind, nothing that I could think of was missing. The tin soldiers, as ever, had a fascination for me, and in an instant I was down upon the floor, ranging them in their serried ranks, while the face of my companion wreathed with an indulgent smile. "You'll do," said she, as I loaded a little spring cannon with a stub of a lead pencil and bowled over half a regiment with one well-directed shot. "These are the finest tin soldiers I ever saw," I cried with enthusiasm. "Only they're not tin," said she. "Solid silver, every man jack of them, except the officers. They're made of platinum." "And will you look at that little electric railroad?" I cried, my eye ranging to the other end of the salon. "Stations, switches, danger signals, cars of all kinds, and even miniature Pullmans, with real little berths that can be let up and down. Who is the lucky kid who's getting all these beautiful things?" She whispered, putting her finger to her lips. "He is coming. Go on and play. Pretend you don't see him until he speaks to you." As she spoke, a door at the far end of the apartment swung gently open, and a little boy tiptoed softly in. He was a golden-haired little chap, and I fell in love with his soft, dreamy eyes the moment my own rested upon them. I could not help glancing up furtively to see his joy over the discovery of all these wondrous possessions. But alas, to my surprise, there was only an unemotional stare in his eyes as they swept the aggregation of childish treasures. Then, on a sudden, he saw me, squatting on the floor, setting up again the army of silver warriors. "How do you do?" he said gently, but with just a touch of weariness in his sad little voice. "Good morning, and a Merry Christmas to you, sir," I replied. "What are you doing?" he asked, drawing near, and watching me with a great deal of seeming curiosity. "I am playing with your soldier," said I. "I hope you don't mind." "Oh, no, indeed," he replied. "But what do you mean by that? What is playing?" I could hardly believe my ears. "What is what?" said I. "You said you were playing, sir," said he, "and I don't know exactly what you mean." Why, said I, scratching my head hard in a mad quest for a definition, for I couldn't for the life of me think of the answer to his question offhand, any more than I could define one of the elements. Playing is, why, it's playing, laddie. Don't you know what it is to play? Oh, yes, said he. It's what you do on the piano. I've been taught to play on the piano, sir. Oh, but this is different, said I. This kind is fun. It's what most little boys do with their toys. You mean breaking them? Said he. No, indeed, said I. It's getting all the fun there is out of them. I think I should like to do that, said he, with a fixed gaze upon the soldiers. Can a little fellow like me learn to play that way? Well, rather, Kitty, said I, reaching out and taking him by the hand. Sit down here on the floor alongside of me, and I'll show you. Oh, no, said he, drawing back. I can't sit on the floor. I'd catch cold. Now, who under the canopy told you that? I demanded, somewhat impatiently, I fear. My governess and both my nurses, sir, said he. You see, there are draughts. Well, there won't be any draughts this time, said I. Just you sit down here, and we'll have a game of marbles. Ever play marbles with your father? No, sir, he replied. He's always too busy, and neither of my nurses has ever known how. But your mother comes up here and plays games with you sometimes, doesn't she? I asked. Mother is busy too, said the child. Besides, she wouldn't care for a game which you had to sit on the floor to. I sprang to my feet and lifted him bodily in my arms, and after squatting him over by the fireplace, where, if there were any draughts at all, they would be as harmless as a summer breeze, I took up a similar position on the other side of the room and initiated him into the mystery of Miggles as well as I could, considering that all his marbles were real agates. You don't happen to have a china alley anywhere, do you? I asked. No, sir, he answered. We only have china plates. Never mind, I interrupted. We can get along very nicely with these. And then for half an hour, despite the rich quality of our paraphernalia, that little boy and I indulged in a glorious game of real plebeian Miggs, and it was a joy to see how quickly his stiff little fingers relaxed and adapted themselves to the uses of his eye, which was as accurate as it was deeply blue. So expert did he become that in a short while he had completely cleaned me out, giving joyous little cries of delight with every hit, and then we turned our attention to the soldiers. I want some playing now, he said gleefully, as I informed him that he had beaten me out of my boots at one of my best games. Show me what you were doing with these soldiers when I came in. All right, said I, obeying with alacrity. First, we'll have a parade. I started a great talking machine standing in one corner of the room, off on a spirited military march, and inside of 10 minutes, with his assistance, I had all the troops out and to all intents and purposes bravely swinging by to the martial music of Sousa. How's that? Said I, when we had got the whole corps arranged to our satisfaction. Fine, he cried, jumping up and down upon the floor and clapping his hands with glee. I've got lots more of these stored away in my toy closet, he went on, but I never knew that you could do such things as this with them. But what did you think they were for? I asked. Why, just to keep, he said hesitatingly. Wait a minute, said I, wheeling a couple of cannon off to a distance of a yard from the passing troops. I'll show you something else you can do with them. I loaded both cannon to the muzzle with dried peas and showed him how to shoot. Now, said I, fire. He snapped the spring, and the dried peas flew out like death-dealing shells in war. In a moment the platinum commander of the forces and about 37 solid silver warriors lay flat on their backs. It needed only a little red ink on the carpet to reproduce in miniature a scene of great carnage, but I shall never forget the expression of mingled joy and regret on his countenance as those creatures went down. "Don't you like it, son?" I asked. "I don't know," he said, with an anxious glance at the prostrate warriors. "They aren't deaded, are they?" "Oh, of course not," said I, restoring the presumably defunct troopers to life by setting them up again. "The only thing that'll dead a soldier like this is to step on him. Try the other gun." Thus reassured, he did as I bade him, and again the proud paraders went down, this time amid shouts of glee. And so we passed an all too fleeting 2 hours, that little boy and I. Through the whole list of his famous toys we went, and as well as I could, I taught him the delicious uses of each and all of them, until finally he seemed to grow weary, and so, drawing up a big armchair before the fire, and taking his tired little body into my lap, with his tousled head cuddled up close over the spot where my heart is alleged to be, I started to read a story to him out of one of the many beautiful books that had been provided for him by his generous parents. But I had not gone far when I saw that his attention was wandering. "Perhaps you'd rather have me tell you a story instead of reading it?" said I. "What's to tell a story?" he asked, fixing his blue eyes gravely upon mine. "Great Scott, Kitty!" said I. "Didn't anybody ever tell you a story?" "No, sir," he replied sleepily. "I get read to every afternoon by my governess, but nobody ever told me a story." "Well, just you listen to this," said I, giving him a hearty squeeze. "Once upon a time there was a little boy," I began, "and he lived in a beautiful house not far from the park, and his daddy—" "What's a daddy?" asked the child, looking up into my face. "Why, a daddy is a little boy's father," I explained. "You've got a daddy." "Oh, yes," he said. "If a daddy is a father, I've got one. I saw him yesterday," he added. "Oh, did you?" said I. "And what did he say to you?" "He said he was glad to see me and hoped I was a good boy," said the child. "He seemed very glad when I told him I hoped so too, and he gave me all these things here, he and my mother." "That was very nice of them," said I huskily. "And they're both coming up sometime to-day or to-morrow to see if I like them," said the lad. "And what are you going to say?" I asked, with difficulty getting the words out over a most unaccountable lump that had risen in my throat. "I'm going to tell them," he began, as his eyes closed sleepily, "that I like them all very, very much." "And which one of them all do you like the best?" said I. He snuggled up closer in my arms, and raising his little head a trifle higher, he kissed me on the tip end of my chin, and murmured softly as he dropped off to sleep, "You." Part 3. "Good night," said my spectral visitor as she left me, once more bending over my desk, whither I had been retransported without my knowledge, for I must have fallen asleep, too, with that little boy in my arms. "You have done a good night's work." "Have I?" said I, rubbing my eyes to see if I were really awake. "But tell me, who was that little kiddie, anyhow?" "He?" she answered with a smile. "Why, he is the child who has everything but—" And then she vanished from my sight. "Everything but what?" I cried, starting up and peering into the darkness into which she had disappeared. But there was no response, and I was left alone to guess the answer to my question. Section 3, Santa Claus and Little Billee. Part 1. He was only a little bit of a chap, and so, when for the first time in his life he came into close contact with the endless current of human things, it was as hard for him to stay put as for some wayward little atom of flotsam and jetsam to keep from tossing about in the surging tides of the sea. His mother had left him there in the big toy shop, with instructions not to move until she came back, while she went off to do some mysterious errand. She thought, no doubt, that with so many beautiful things on every side to delight his eye and hold his attention, strict obedience to her commands would not be hard. But alas, the good lady reckoned not upon the magnetic power of attraction of all those lovely objects in detail. She saw them only as a mass of wonders which, in all probability, would so dazzle his vision as to leave him incapable of movement. But little Billee was not so indifferent as all that. When a phonograph at the other end of the shop began to rattle off melodious tunes and funny jokes, in spite of the instructions he had received, off he pattered as fast as his little legs would carry him to investigate. After that, forgetful of everything else, finding himself caught in the constantly moving stream of Christmas shoppers, he was borne along in the resistless current until he found himself at last out upon the street, alone, free, and independent. It was great fun at first. By and by, however, the afternoon waned. The sun, as if anxious to hurry along the dawn of Christmas Day, sank early to bed, and the electric lights along the darkening highway began to pop out here and there, like so many merry stars come down to earth to celebrate the gladdest time of all the year. Little Billee began to grow tired, and then he thought of his mamma, and tried to find the shop where he had promised to remain quiet until her return. Up and down the street he wandered until his little legs grew weary, but there was no sign of the shop, nor of the beloved face he was seeking. Once again, and yet once again after that, did the little fellow traverse that crowded highway, his tears getting harder and harder to keep back, and then, joy of joys, whom should he see walking slowly along the sidewalk but Santa Claus himself? The saint was strangely decorated with two queer-looking boards, with big red letters on them, hung over his back and chest. But there was still that same kindly, gray-bearded face, the red cloak with the fur trimmings, and the same dear old cap that the children's friend had always worn in the pictures of him that little Billee had seen. With a glad cry of happiness, little Billee ran to meet the old fellow, and put his hand gently into that of the saint. He thought it very strange that Santa Claus's hand should be so red and cold and rough, and so chapped. But he was not in any mood to be critical. He had been face to face with a very disagreeable situation. Then, when things had seemed blackest to him, everything had come right again, and he was too glad to take more than passing notice of anything strange and odd. Santa Claus, of course, would recognize him at once, and would know just how to take him back to his mamma at home, wherever that might be. Little Billee had never thought to inquire just where home was. All he knew was that it was a big gray stone house on a long street somewhere, with a tall iron railing in front of it, not far from the park. "Howdy do, Mr. Santa Claus," said Little Billee, as the other's hand unconsciously tightened over his own. "Why, howdy do, Kitty," replied the old fellow, glancing down at his new-found friend with surprise gleaming from his deep-set eyes. "Where did you drop from?" "Oh, I'm out," said Little Billee bravely. "My mama left me a little while ago while she went off about something, and I guess I got losted." "Very likely," returned the old saint with a smile. "Little 2x4 fellows are apt to get losted when they start in on their own hook, 'specially days like these, with such crowds hustlin' around." "But it's all right now," suggested Little Billee hopefully. "I'm found again, ain't I?" "Oh, yes, indeedy, you're found all right, Kitty," Santa Claus agreed. "And pretty soon you'll take me home again, won't you?" said the child. "Surest thing you know," answered Santa Claus, looking down upon the bright but tired little face with a comforting smile. "What might your address be?" "My what?" asked Little Billee. "Your address," repeated Santa Claus. "Where do you live?" The answer was a ringing peal of childish laughter. "As if you didn't know that!" cried Little Billee, giggling. "Ha ha!" laughed Santa Claus. "Can't fool you, can I? It would be funny if, after keeping an eye on you all these years since you was a baby, I didn't know where you lived, huh?" "Awful funny," agreed Little Billee. "But tell me, Mr. Santa Claus, what sort of a boy do you think I have been?" he added with a shade of anxiety in his voice. "Pretty good, pretty good," Santa Claus answered, turning in his steps and walking back again along the path he had just traveled, which Little Billee thought was rather a strange thing to do. "You've got more white marks than black ones. A good many more. 150 times as many, Kitty. Fact is, you're all right, way up among the good boys. Though once or twice last summer, you know." "Yes, I know," said Little Billee meekly, "but I didn't mean to be naughty." "That's just what I said to the bookkeeper," said Santa Claus, "and so we gave you a gray mark, half white and half black, that doesn't count either way, for or against you." "Oh, thank you, sir," said Little Billee, much comforted. "Don't mention it. You are very welcome, Kitty," said Santa Claus, giving the youngster's hand a gentle squeeze. "Why do you call me Kitty when you know my name is Little Billee?" asked the boy. "Oh, that's what I call all good boys," exclaimed Santa Claus. "You see, we divide them up into two kinds, the good boys and the naughty boys, and the good boys we call kiddies, and the naughty boys we call caddies, and there you are." Just then Little Billee noticed for the first time the square boards that Santa Claus was wearing. "What are you wearing those boards for, Mr. Santa Claus?" he asked. If the lad had looked closely enough, he would have seen a very unhappy look come into the old man's face, but there was nothing of it in his answer. "Oh, those are my new-fangled back and chest protectors, my lad," he replied. "Sometimes we have bitter winds blowing at Christmas, and I have to be ready for them. It wouldn't do for Santa Claus to come down with the sneezes at Christmas time, you know. No, sir—ree! This board in front keeps the wind off my chest, and the one behind keeps me from getting rheumatism in my back. They are a great protection against the weather." "I'll have to tell my papa about them," said Little Billee, much impressed by the simplicity of this arrangement. "We have a glass board on the front of our ortymobile to keep the wind off Henry. He's our chauffeur. But papa wears a fur coat, and sometimes he says the wind goes right through that. He'll be glad to know about these boards." "I shouldn't wonder," smiled Santa Claus. "They aren't very becoming, but they are mighty useful. You might save up your pennies and give your papa a pair like 'em for his next Christmas." Santa Claus laughed as he spoke, But there was a catch in his voice which little Billee was too young to notice. "You've got letters printed there," said the boy, peering around in front of his companion at the lettering on the board. "What do they spell? You know, I haven't learned to read yet." "And why should you know how to read at your age?" said Santa Claus. "You're not more than—" "5 last month," said little Billee proudly. It was such a great age. "My, as old as that!" cried Santa Claus. "Well, you are growing fast. Why, it don't seem more than yesterday that you was a pink-cheeked baby, and here you are big enough to be out alone. That's more than my little boy is able to do." Santa Claus shivered slightly, and little Billee was surprised to see a tear glistening in his eye. "Why, have you got a little boy?" he asked. "Oh, yes, little Billee," said the saint. "A poor, white-faced little chap, about a year older than you, who— Well, never mind, kiddie. He's a kiddie, too. Let's talk about something else, or I'll have icicles in my eyes." "You didn't tell me what those letters on the board spell," said little Billee. "Merry Christmas to everybody," said Santa Claus. "I have the words printed there so that everybody can see them, and if I miss wishing anybody a Merry Christmas, he'll know I meant it just the same." "You're awfully kind, aren't you?" said little Billee, squeezing his friend's hand affectionately. "It must make you very happy to be able to be so kind to everybody." Part 2. Santa Claus made no reply to this remark, beyond giving a very deep sigh, which little Billee chose to believe was evidence of a great inward content. They walked on now in silence, for little Billee was beginning to feel almost too tired to talk, and Santa Claus seemed to be thinking of something else. Finally, however, the little fellow spoke. "I guess I'd like to go home now, Mr. Santa Claus," he said. "I'm tired, and I'm afraid my mama will be wondering where I've gone to." "That's so, my little man," said Santa Claus, stopping short in his walk up and down the block. "Your mother will be worried, for a fact. And your father, too. I know how I'd feel if my little boy got losted and hadn't come home at dinner time. I don't believe you know where you live, though. Now, honest. Come, fess up, Billee. You don't know where you live, do you?" "Why, yes, I do," said little Billee. "It's in the big gray stone house with the iron fence in front of it, near the park." "Oh, that's easy enough," laughed Santa Claus nervously. "Anybody could say he lived in a gray stone house with a fence around it, near the park. But you don't know what street it's on, nor the number either. I'll bet 14 wooden giraffes against a monkey on a stick." "No, I don't," said little Billee frankly. "But I know the number of our ortymobile. It's NY." "Fine!" laughed Santa Claus. "If you really were lost, it would be a great help to know that. But not being lost, as you ain't, why, of course, we can get along without it. It's queer you don't know your last name, though." "I do, too, know my last name," blurted out little Billee. "It's Billee. That's the last one they gave me, anyhow." Santa Claus reflected for a moment, eyeing the child anxiously. "I don't believe you even know your papa's name," he said. "Yes, I do," said little Billee indignantly. "His name is Mr. Harrison." "Well, you are a smart little chap," cried Santa Claus gleefully. "You got it right the very first time, didn't you?" "I really didn't think you knew." "But I don't believe you know where your papa keeps his bake shop, where he makes all those nice cakes and cookies you eat." Billee began to laugh again. "You can't fool me, Mr. Santa Claus," he said. "I know my papa don't keep a bake shop just as well as you do. My papa owns a bank." "Splendid! Made of tin, I suppose, with a nice little hole at the top to drop pennies into," said Santa Claus. "No, it ain't, either." retorted Little Billee. "It's made of stone and has more than 1,000,000 windows in it. I went down there with my mama to papa's office the other day, so I guess I ought to know." "Well, I should say so," said Santa Claus. "Nobody better. By the way, Billy, what does your mama call your papa? Billy, like you?" he added. "Oh, no, indeed," returned Little Billee. "She calls him papa, except once in a while when he's going away, and then she says, 'Good bye, Tom.'" "Fine again," said Santa Claus, blowing upon his fingers, for now that the sun had completely disappeared over in the west, it was getting very cold. "Thomas Harrison, banker," he muttered to himself. "What with a telephone book and the city directory, I guess we can find our way home with Little Billee." "Do you think we can go now, Mr. Santa Claus?" asked Little Billee, for the cold was beginning to cut through his little coat, and the Sandman had started to scatter the sleepy seeds all around. "Yes, sirree," returned Santa Claus promptly. "Right away, off now, instantly, at once. I'm afraid I can't get my reindeer here in time to take us up to the house, but we can go in the cars. I don't know whether we can or not, come to think of it. Ah, do you happen to have 10 cents in your pocket?" Santa added with an embarrassed air. "You see, I've left my pocketbook in the sleigh with my toy pack, and besides, mine is only toy money, and they don't take that on the cars." "I got 25 cents," said Little Billee proudly, as he dug his way down into his pocket and brought the shining silver piece to light. "You can have it if you want it." "Thank you," said Santa Claus, taking the proffered coin. "We'll start home right away. Only come in here first while I telephone to Santaville, telling the folks where I am." He led the little fellow into a public telephone station, where he eagerly scanned the names in the book. At last it was found: Thomas Harrison, 7654 Plaza. And then, in the seclusion of the telephone booth, Santa Claus sent the gladdest of all Christmas messages over the wire to 2 distracted parents. "I have found your little boy wandering in the street. He is safe, and I will bring him home right away." Part 3. 15 minutes later, there might have been seen the strange spectacle of a footsore Santa Claus leading a sleepy little boy up Fifth Avenue to a cross street, which shall be nameless. The boy vainly endeavored to persuade his companion to come in and meet Mama. "No, Billy," the old man replied sadly, "I must hurry back. You see, Kitty, this is my busy day. Besides, I never go into a house except through the chimney. I wouldn't know how to behave going in at a front door." But it was not to be as Santa Claus willed, for Little Billee's papa and his mama and his brothers and sisters and the butler and the housemaids and 2 or 3 policemen were waiting at the front door when they arrived. "Aha!" said one of the policemen, seizing Santa Claus roughly by the arm. "We've landed you all right. Where have you been with this boy?" "You let him alone!" cried Little Billee, with more courage than he had ever expected to show in the presence of a policeman. "He's a friend of mine." "That's right, officer," said Little Billee's father. "Let him alone. I haven't entered any complaint against this man." "But you want to look out for these fellers, Mr. Harrison," returned the officer. "First thing you know, they'll be making a trade of this sort of thing." "I'm no grafter," retorted Santa Claus indignantly. "I found the little chap wandering along the street, and as soon as I was able to locate where he lived, I brought him home. That's all there is to it." "He knew where I lived all along," laughed Little Billee, "only he pretended he didn't, just to see if I knew." "You see, sir," said the officer, "it won't do him any harm to let him cool his heels." "It is far better that he should warm them, officer," said Mr. Harrison kindly, "and he can do that here. Come in, my man," he added, turning to Santa Claus with a grateful smile, "just for a minute, anyhow. Mrs. Harrison will wish to thank you for bringing our boy back to us. We have had a terrible afternoon." "That's all right, sir," said Santa Claus modestly. "It wasn't anything, sir. I didn't really find him. It was him as found me, sir. He took me for the real thing, I guess." Nevertheless, Santa Claus, led by Little Billee's persistent father, went into the house. Now that the boy could see him in the full glare of many electric lights, his furs did not seem the most gorgeous things in the world. When the flapping front of his red jacket flew open, the child was surprised to see how ragged was the thin gray coat it covered, and as for the good old saint's comfortable stomach, strange to say, it was not. I wish you all a Merry Christmas," faltered Santa Claus, "but I really must be going, sir." "Nonsense!" cried Mr. Harrison. "Not until you have got rid of this chill, and—" "I can't stay, sir," said Santa. "I'll lose my job if I do." "Well, what if you do? I'll give you a better one," said the banker. "I can't, I can't," faltered the man. I've got a little Billy of my own at home waitin' for me, sir. If I hadn't," he added fiercely, "do you suppose I'd be doing this?" He pointed at the painted boards and shuddered. "It's him as has kept me from the river," he muttered hoarsely. And then this dispenser of happiness to so many millions of people all the world over sank into a chair, and, covering his face with his hands, wept like a child. "I guess Santa Claus is tired, papa," said Little Billee, snuggling up closely to the old fellow and taking hold of his hand sympathetically. "He's been walking a lot to day." "Yes, my son," said Mr. Harrison gravely, "these are very busy times for Santa Claus, and I guess that, as he still has a hard night ahead of him, James had better ring up Henry and tell him to bring the car around right away so that we may take him back to his little boy. We'll have to lend him a fur coat to keep the wind off, too, for it is a bitter night." "Oh," said Little Billee, "I haven't told you about these boards he wears. He has 'em to keep the wind off, and they're fine, papa." Little Billee pointed to the two signboards which Santa Claus had leaned up against the wall. "He says he uses 'em on cold nights," the lad went on. "They have writing on them, too. Do you know what it says?" "Yes," said Mr. Harrison, glancing at the boards. "It says, 'If you want a good Christmas dinner for a quarter, go to Smithers Cafe.'" Little Billee roared with laughter. "Papa, you're trying to fool me, just as you did when you pretended not to know where I lived, Santa Claus," he said, looking up into the old fellow's face, his own countenance brimming over with mirth. "You mustn't think he can't read, though," the lad added hastily. "He's only joking." "Oh, no, indeed. I shouldn't have thought that," replied Santa Claus, smiling through his tears. "I've been joking, have I?" said Little Billee's papa. Well, then, Mr. Billiam, suppose you inform me what it says on those boards." "Merry Christmas to everybody," said Little Billee proudly. "I couldn't read it myself, but he told me what it said. He has it printed there so that if he misses saying it to anybody, they'll know he means it just the same." "By Jove, Mr. Santa Claus!" cried Little Billee's papa, grasping the old man warmly by the hand. "I owe you 10,000,000 apologies. I haven't believed in you for many a long year, but now, sir, I take it all back. You do exist, and by the great horn spoon, you are the real thing." Part 4. Little Billee had the satisfaction of acting as host to Santa Claus at a good, luscious dinner, which Santa Claus must have enjoyed very much, because when explaining why he was so hungry, it came out that the poor old chap had been so busy all day that he had not had time to get any lunch. No, not even one of those good dinners at Smithers Cafe to which Little Billee's father had jokingly referred. And after dinner, Henry came with the automobile, and bidding everybody good night, Santa Claus and Little Billee's papa went out of the house together. Christmas morning dawned, and Little Billee awoke from wonderful dreams of rich gifts and of extraordinary adventures with his new-found friend, to find the reality quite as splendid as the dream things. Later, what was his delight when a little boy, not much older than himself, a pale, thin, but playful little fellow, arrived at the house to spend the day with him, bringing with him a letter from Santa Claus himself. This was what the letter said: Dear Little Billee, you must not tell anybody except your papa and your mamma, but the little boy who brings you this letter is my little boy, and I am going to let you have him for a playfellow for Christmas Day. Treat him kindly for his papa's sake, and if you think his papa is worth loving, tell him so. Do not forget me, Little Billee. I shall see you often in the future, but I doubt if you will see me. I am not going to return to 23rd Street again, but shall continue my work in the land of Yule, in the Palace of Goodwill, whose beautiful windows look out upon the homes of all good children. Good-bye, Little Billee, and the happiest of happy Christmases to you and all of yours. Affectionately, Santa Claus. When Little Billee's mamma read this to him that Christmas morning, a stray little tear ran down her cheek and fell upon Little Billee's hand. "Why, what are you crying for, mamma?" he asked. "With happiness, my dear little son," his mother answered. "I was afraid yesterday that I might have lost my little boy forever, but now—" "You have an extra one thrown in for Christmas, haven't you?" said Little Billee, taking his new playmate by the hand. The visitor smiled back at him with a smile so sweet that anybody might have guessed that he was the son of Santa Claus. As for the latter, Little Billee has not seen him again, but down at his father's bank there is a new messenger named John, who has a voice so like Santa Claus's voice that whenever Little Billee goes down there in the motor to ride home at night with his papa, he runs into the bank and has a long talk with him, just for the pleasure of pretending that it is Santa Claus he is talking to. Indeed, the voice is so like that once a sudden and strange idea flashed across Little Billee's mind. "Have you ever been on 23rd Street, John?" he asked. 23rd Street?" replied the messenger, scratching his head as if very much puzzled. "What's that?" "Why, it's a street," said Little Billee rather vaguely. "Well, to tell you the truth, Billee," said John, "I've heard tell of 23rd Street, and they say it is a very beautiful and interesting spot. But, you know, I don't get much chance to travel. I've been too busy all my life to go abroad." "Abroad!" roared Little Billee, grinning at John's utterly absurd mistake. "Why, 23rd Street ain't abroad. It's uptown, near 22nd Street." "Really?" returned John, evidently tremendously surprised. "Well, well, well! Who'd have thought of that? Well, if that's the case, sometime when I get a week off, I'll have to go and spend my vacation there." From which Little Billee concluded that his suspicion that John might be Santa Claus in disguise was entirely without foundation in fact.
If you're on the hunt for a good present, explore our Gumroad shop, home to several audiobooks, including The Wizard of Oz. These premium audiobooks in CraftLit fashion will come with all the annotations, commentary, and detailed insights you might have missed. Just head over to craftlit.gumroad.com. That's craftlit gumroad, Gum as in Mary, ROAD as in dog.com, or use the link in the show notes. Thank you for your support. Take care. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Section 1 of Told After Supper by Jerome K. Jerome. Introductory. It was Christmas Eve. I begin this way because it is the proper, orthodox, respectable way to begin, and I have been brought up in a proper, orthodox, respectable way, and taught to always do the proper, orthodox, respectable thing, and the habit clings to me. Of course, as a mere matter of information, it is quite unnecessary to mention the date at all. The experienced reader knows it was Christmas Eve without my telling him. It always is Christmas Eve in a ghost story. Christmas Eve is the ghosts' great gala night. On Christmas Eve they hold their annual fete. On Christmas Eve everybody in Ghostland who is anybody, or rather, speaking of ghosts, one should say, I suppose, every nobody who is any nobody, comes out to show himself or herself, to see and to be seen, to promenade about and display their winding sheets and grave clothes to each other, to criticise one another's style and sneer at one another's complexion. Christmas Eve parade, as I expect they themselves term it, is a function doubtless eagerly prepared for and looked forward to throughout Ghostland, especially the swagger set, such as the murdered barons, the crime-stained countesses, and the earls who came over with the Conqueror and assassinated their relatives and died raving mad. Hollow moans and fiendish grins are, one may be sure, energetically practised up. Blood-curdling shrieks and marrow-freezing gestures are probably rehearsed for weeks beforehand. Rusty chains and gory daggers are overhauled and put into good working order, and sheets and shrouds, laid carefully by from the previous year's show, are taken down and shaken out and mended and aired. Oh, it is a stirring night in Ghostland, the night of December the 24th. Ghosts never come out on Christmas night itself, you may have noticed. Christmas Eve, we suspect, has been too much for them. They are not used to excitement. For about a week after Christmas Eve, the gentlemen ghosts, no doubt, feel as if they were all head, and go about making solemn resolutions to themselves that they will stop in next Christmas Eve, while lady spectres are contradictory and snappish, and liable to burst into tears and leave the room hurriedly on being spoken to, for no perceptible cause whatever. Ghosts with no position to maintain, mere middle-class ghosts, occasionally, I believe, do a little haunting on off nights, on All Hallows Eve and at Midsummer, and some will even run up for a mere local event to celebrate, for instance, the anniversary of the hanging of somebody's grandfather, or to prophesy a misfortune. He does love prophesying a misfortune, does the average British ghost. Send him out to prognosticate trouble to somebody, and he is happy. Let him force his way into a peaceful home, and turn the whole house upside down by foretelling a funeral, or predicting a bankruptcy, or hinting at a coming disgrace, or some other terrible disaster about which nobody in their senses want to know sooner than they can possibly help, and the prior knowledge of which can serve no useful purpose whatsoever, and he feels that he is combining duty with pleasure. He would never forgive himself if anybody in his family had a trouble and he had not been there for a couple of months beforehand, doing silly tricks on the lawn or balancing himself on somebody's bedrail. Then there are besides the very young or very conscientious ghosts with a lost will or an undiscovered number weighing heavy on their minds, who will haunt steadily all the year round. And also the fussy ghost, who is indignant at having been buried in the dustbin or in the village pond, and who never gives the parish a single night's quiet until somebody has paid for a first-class funeral for him. But these are the exceptions. As I have said, the average orthodox ghost does his one turn a year on Christmas Eve and is satisfied. Why on Christmas Eve, of all nights in the year, I never could myself understand. It is invariably one of the most dismal of nights to be out in, cold, muddy, and wet. And besides, at Christmas time, everybody has quite enough to put up with in the way of a house full of living relations, without wanting the ghosts of any dead ones mooning about the place, I am sure. There must be something ghostly in the air of Christmas, something about the close, muggy atmosphere that draws up the ghosts, like the dampness of the summer rains brings out the frogs and snails. And not only do the ghosts themselves always walk on Christmas Eve, but live people always sit and talk about them on Christmas Eve. Whenever 5 or 6 English-speaking people meet round a fire on Christmas Eve, they start telling each other ghost stories. Nothing satisfies us on Christmas Eve but to hear each other tell authentic anecdotes about spectres. It is a genial, festive season, and we love to muse upon graves, and dead bodies, and murders, and blood. There is a good deal of similarity about our ghostly experiences. But this, of course, is not our fault, but the fault of ghosts, who never will try any new performances, but always will keep steadily to old, safe business. The consequence is that, when you have been at one Christmas Eve party, and heard 6 people relate their adventures with spirits, you do not require to hear any more ghost stories. To listen to any further ghost stories after that would be like sitting out 2 farcical comedies or taking in 2 comic journals. The repetition would become wearisome. There is always the young man who was, one year, spending the Christmas at a country house, and on Christmas Eve they put him to sleep in the west wing. Then, in the middle of the night, the room door quietly opens, and somebody, generally a lady in her nightdress, walks slowly in and comes and sits on the bed. The young man thinks it must be one of the visitors, or some relative of the family, though he does not remember having previously seen her, who, unable to go to sleep, and feeling lonesome all by herself, has come into his room for a chat. He has no idea it is a ghost. He is so unsuspicious. She does not speak, however, and when he looks again, she's gone. The young man relates the circumstance at the breakfast table next morning, and asks each of the ladies present if it were she who was his visitor, but they all assure him that it was not, and the host, who has grown deadly pale, begs him to say no more about the matter, which strikes the young man as a singularly strange request. After breakfast, the host takes the young man into a corner and explains to him that what he saw was the ghost of a lady who had been murdered in that very bed, or who had murdered somebody else there. It does not really matter which. You can be a ghost by murdering somebody else or by being murdered yourself, whichever you prefer. The murdered ghost is perhaps the more popular, but on the other hand, you can frighten people better if you are the murdered one, because then you can show your wounds and do groans. Then there is the sceptical guest. It is always the guest who gets let in for this sort of thing, by the by. A ghost never thinks much of his own family. It is the guest he likes to haunt, who, after listening to the host's ghost story on Christmas Eve, laughs at it, and says that he does not believe there are such things as ghosts at all, and that he will sleep in the haunted chamber that very night, if they will let him. Everybody urges him not to be reckless, but he persists in his foolhardiness, and goes up to the yellow chamber, or whatever colour the haunted room may be, with a light heart and a candle, and wishes them all good night and shuts the door. Next morning he has got snow-white hair. He does not tell anybody what he has seen. It is too awful. There is also the plucky guest who sees a ghost and knows it is a ghost, and watches it as it comes into the room and disappears through the wainscot, after which, as the ghost does not seem to be coming back, and there is nothing consequently to be gained by stopping awake, he goes to sleep. He does not mention having seen the ghost to anybody for fear of frightening them. Some people are so nervous about ghosts, but determines to wait for the next night and see if the apparition appears again. It does appear again, and this time he gets out of bed, dresses himself and does his hair and follows it, and then discovers a secret passage leading from the bedroom down into the beer cellar, a passage which, no doubt, was not unfrequently made use of in the bad old days of yore. After him comes the young man who woke up with a strange sensation in the middle of the night and found his rich bachelor uncle standing by his bedside. The rich uncle smiled a weird sort of smile and vanished. The young man immediately got up and looked at his watch. It had stopped at 4:30, he having forgotten to wind it. He made inquiries the next day, and found that, strangely enough, his rich uncle, whose only nephew he was, had married a widow with 11 children at exactly 11:45, only 2 days ago. The young man does not attempt to explain the circumstance. All he does is to vouch for the truth of his narrative. And to mention another case, there is the gentleman who is returning home late at night from a Freemasons' dinner, and who, noticing a light issuing from a ruined abbey, creeps up and looks through the keyhole. He sees the ghost of a grey sister kissing the ghost of a brown monk, and is so inexpressibly shocked and frightened that he faints on the spot, and is discovered there the next morning lying in a heap against the door, still speechless, and with his faithful latch-key clasped tightly in his hand. All these things happen on Christmas Eve. They are all told of on Christmas Eve. For ghost stories to be told on any other evening than the evening of the 24th of December would be impossible in English society as at present regulated. Therefore, in introducing the sad but authentic ghost stories that follow hereafter, I feel that it is unnecessary to inform the student of Anglo-Saxon literature that the date on which they were told, and on which the incidents took place, was Christmas Eve. Nevertheless, I do so. End of section 1. Section 2. How the stories came to be told. It was Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve at my Uncle John's Christmas Eve. There is too much Christmas Eve about this book. I can see that myself. It is beginning to get monotonous even to me, but I don't see how to avoid it now. At number 47 Laburnum Grove, Tooting. Christmas Eve in the dimly lighted, there was a gas strike on, front parlour, where the flickering firelight threw strange shadows on the highly coloured wallpaper, while without, in the wild street, the storm raged pitilessly, and the wind, like some unquiet spirit, flew moaning across the square, and passed, wailing with a troubled cry, round by the milk-shop. We had had supper, and were sitting round talking and smoking. We had had a very good supper indeed. Unpleasantness has occurred since in our family in connection with this party. Rumours have been put about in our family concerning the matter generally, but more particularly concerning my own share in it, and remarks have been passed which have not so much surprised me, because I know what our family are, but which have pained me very much. As for my Aunt Maria, I do not know when I shall care to see her again. I should have thought Aunt Maria might have known me better. But although injustice, gross injustice, as I shall explain later on, has been done to myself, that shall not deter me from doing justice to others, even to those who have made unfeeling insinuations. I will do justice to Aunt Maria's hot veal pasties and toasted lobsters, followed by her own special make of cheesecakes, warm (there is no sense to my thinking in cold cheesecakes, you lose half the flavour), and washed down by Uncle John's own particular old ale, and acknowledge that they were most tasty. I did justice to them then. Aunt Maria herself could not but admit that. After supper, Uncle brewed some whisky punch. I did justice to that also. Uncle John himself said so. He said he was glad to notice that I liked it. Aunt went to bed soon after supper, leaving the local curate, old Dr. Scrubbles, Mr. Samuel Coombs, our member of the County Council, Teddy Biffles, and myself to keep Uncle company. We agreed that it was too early to give in for some time yet, so Uncle brewed another bowl of punch, and I think we all did justice to that. At least I know I did. It is a passion with me, is the desire to do justice. We sat up for a long while, and the doctor brewed some gin punch later on for a change, though I could not taste much difference myself. But it was all good, and we were very happy. Everybody was so kind. Uncle John told us a very funny story in the course of the evening. Oh, it was a funny story. I forget what it was about now, but I know it amused me very much at the time. I do not think I ever laughed so much in all my life. It is strange that I cannot recollect that story too, because he told it us 4 times, and it was entirely our own fault that he did not tell it us a 5th. After that, the doctor sang a very clever song, in the course of which he imitated all the different animals in a farmyard. He did mix them a bit. He brayed for the bantam cock and crowed for the pig, but we knew what he meant all right. I started relating a most interesting anecdote, but was somewhat surprised to observe, as I went on, that nobody was paying the slightest attention to me whatever. I thought this rather rude of them at first, until it dawned upon me that I was talking to myself all the time, instead of out aloud, so that, of course, they did not know that I was telling them a tale at all, and were probably puzzled to understand the meaning of my animated expression and eloquent gestures. It was a most curious mistake for any one to make. I never knew such a thing happened to me before. Later on, our curate did tricks with cards. He asked us if we had ever seen a game called the 3-card trick. He said it was an artifice by means of which low, unscrupulous men, frequenters of race meetings and such like haunts, swindled foolish young fellows out of their money. He said it was a very simple trick to do. It all depended on the quickness of the hand. It was the quickness of the hand deceived the eye. He said he would show us the imposture, so that we might be warned against it, and not be taken in by it. And he fetched Uncle's pack of cards from the tea-caddy, and selecting 3 cards from the pack, 2 plain cards and 1 picture card, sat down on the hearthrug and explained to us what he was going to do. He said, "Now I shall take these 3 cards in my hand, so, and let you all see them. And then I shall quietly lay them down on the rug, with the backs uppermost, and ask you to pick out the picture card, and you'll think you'll know which one it is." And he did it. Old Mr. Coombs, who is also one of our churchwardens, said it was the middle card. "You fancy you saw it?" said our curate, smiling. "I don't fancy anything at all about it," replied Mr. Coombs. "I tell you it's the middle card. I'll bet you $half it's the middle card." "There you are, that's just what I was explaining to you," said our curate, turning to the rest of us. "That's the way these foolish young fellows that I was speaking of are lured on to lose their money. They make sure they know the card, they fancy they saw it. They don't grasp the idea that it is the quickness of the hand that has deceived their eye." He said he had known young men go off to a boat race or a cricket match with pounds in their pocket, and come home early in the afternoon stone broke, having lost all their money at this demoralizing game. He said he should take Mr. Coombs's half-crown, because it would teach Mr. Coombs a very useful lesson, and probably be the means of saving Mr. Coombs's money in the future, and he should give the 2 and 6pence to the blanket fund. "Don't you worry about that," retorted old Mr. Coombs. "Don't you take the half-crown out of the blanket fund, that's all." And he put his money on the middle card and turned it up. Sure enough, it really was the Queen. We were all very much surprised, especially the curate. He said that it did sometimes happen that way, though, that a man did sometimes lay on the right card by accident. Our curate said it was, however, the most unfortunate thing a man could do for himself, if he only knew it, because when a man tried and won, it gave him a taste for the so-called sport, and it lured him on into risking again and again, until he had to retire from the contest a broken and ruined man. Then he did the trick again. Mr. Coombs said it was the card next the coal scuttle this time, and wanted to put 5 shillings on it. We laughed at him and tried to persuade him against it. He would listen to no advice, however, but insisted on plunging. Our curate said very well then. He had warned him, and that was all that he could do. If he, Mr. Coombs, was determined to make a fool of himself, he, Mr. Coombs, must do so. Our curate said he should take the 5 shillings, and that would put things right again with the blanket fund. So Mr. Coombs put 2 half-crowns on the card next the coal scuttle, and turned it up. Sure enough, it was the Queen again. After that, Uncle John had a florin on, and he won. And then we all played at it, and we all won. All except the curate, that is. He had a very bad quarter of an hour. I never knew a man have such hard luck at cards. He lost every time. We had some more punch after that, and Uncle made such a funny mistake in brewing it, he left out the whisky. Oh, we did laugh at him, and we made him put in double quantity afterwards as a forfeit. Oh, we did have such fun that evening. And then, somehow or other, we must have got on to ghosts, because the next recollection I have is that we were telling ghost stories to each other. End of section 2.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy what we do at CraftLit and want to listen to more of our audio, feel free to visit us at our Gumroad shop and check out all our premium annotated books. Charles Dickens's Bleak House, for example, has more than 40 hours worth of annotated audiobook. We are not joking. If this is something you're interested in, go to craftlit.gumroad.com. That's CRAFTLIT.gumroad, GUM as in Mary, ROAD as in dog.com to access our premium books or buy them as a gift. Happy holidays.
Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. In Bethlehem in Israel this blessed babe was born, and laid within the manger upon this blessed morn. The which his mother Mary did nothing take and scorn. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. From God our heavenly Father, a blessed angel came, and unto certain shepherds brought tidings of the same, how that in Bethlehem was born a Son of God by name. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. Fear not, then said the angel, let nothing you affright. This day is born a Saviour of our pure Virgin bride, to free all those who trust in him from Satan's power and might. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. The shepherds at those tidings rejoiced much in mind, and left their flocks a feeding in tempest, storm, and wind, and went to Bethlehem straight away the Son of God to find. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. And when they came to Bethlehem, where our dear Saviour lay, they found him in a manger, where oxen feed on hay. His mother Mary kneeling down unto the Lord did pray. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. Now to the Lord sing praises, all you within this place, and with true love and brotherhood each other now embrace. This holy tide of Christmas all other doth deface. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, performed for LibriVox.org by DN.
If you enjoy what we do here on CraftLit, please don't forget to like and subscribe on iTunes. Give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button on YouTube. You can also support the show by subscribing to the CraftLit App Premium feed. You can check the link below for details. Your support helps keep CraftLit going strong, and we've got plenty of ways for you to get involved now. If you want more perks, you can head over to Patreon at patreon.com/craftlit and become a patron of this art. You can also join our YouTube channel memberships for access to tons of premium books as bonuses, or you can support us at ko-fi.com/craftlit. And guess what? We've just relaunched our premium memberships over on craftlit.com. Go to craftlit.com/premium and check out all of the details there. Link is below as well. For a one-stop shop to all things CraftLit, please visit Linktree at linktr.ee/CraftLit channel. This is your go-to hub for all of our social media and more. They're all listed there for you. And I keep forgetting to mention, come join our Facebook group. It is full of the kindest, most creative makers and readers, and even some people who never really used to read. We've got them now. All right, that's it for now. Thank you. Take care of yourself. Have a great one. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye.